So this is actually the first of a series of video snacks that we're calling here at Purple Voodoo, where I have been reaching out to people that I know through various walks of life and business, and asking them to, I guess, weigh in on a couple of our core philosophies and beliefs here at Purple Voodoo, and how they show up in the world of work, regardless of vocation, profession, subject matter expertise, etc. And so my absolute first guest is also known as my Wonder Twin. We have the same birthdays that we found out at a conference a couple of years ago when we met. We've been fast friends ever since. And I'd like to welcome Joel to the video this morning. So you're in Iowa, right?
I am in Iowa. So it's a lot like Canada, except just a little further south and still cold.
Yeah, actually, I think Iowa, we might be not too far off the same latitude. Although in Toronto, in the last 2 days, we have had a very Christmas-like November.
Yeah, it's getting cold here as well, and the snow has already started to fall.
Yeah. So as I mentioned to you, Joel, when we chatted, this is really just an opportunity for us to publicly let people into our regular conversations when we get on the horn or on a video conference and talk about some of our similar business opportunities and challenges. We have some crossover in terms of how we work and kind of clients we work with. And just to add an informal conversation to the questions that we often ask people in terms of how do human beings do the work in your workplace, regardless of what you do. And so we have some really loose gates around this conversation, but it's really just an opportunity for people to peek in the window of a Joel Cat conversation.
Absolutely. And we have to have loose gates because this is going to go all.
You know it, yeah. So a couple of things that are core to the Purple Voodoo philosophy are these. One is that business is people. That's been a cliche that's been around forever. Business is people. But people are human, and human behavior is actually what drives business results. The second is that whole human beings show up at work. They don't sort of take their work self and go to work and then discard or cleave off all the other human parts of themselves when they show up in the workplace. And lastly, that simplicity and clarity are two fundamental necessities that really support people doing meaningful, productive, and efficient work. Absolutely. And so that's kind of the, hey, let's talk about these things and how they show up for you and the work that you do with your clients. So up to you where you want to start. I know I kind of laid out a buffet. I'm like, hey man, start where you like.
Well, I will start right over here with the carbohydrates. And I would say, so I love the fact that you start with the people part of it, because too often when we work with businesses, they want to go to process and they want to go to key metrics and they want to go to all these things that have nothing to do with the human. And I think for me, one of the biggest challenges with businesses is realizing that whatever it is that they're targeting for their big improvement or for their key metric, whether it's sales, whether it's customer service, whether it's rollout of strategy, none of that happens without people. Yeah. And so I think quite often what I find myself when organizations invite me in to help with that process, or in some cases actually coming in and help them fix a process, is that they start to realize pretty quickly that it's not about the process, it's not about the key metric, it's about the people. Yeah. And so, one of the things that's been quite clear to me over the last 12 to 18 months, as I've gone through this a number of times and working with folks like you in the ACP community, is things like organizational change aren't about the organization. Organizational change is really individual change on an organizational basis. So if you can get individuals within the organization to change and be excited or passionate about what you're driving, as those people get added up, if you get enough of those people excited about it and willing to change, that's when organizational change actually starts, right? It's the same thing that we talk around culture. But until organizations realize that, until business leaders realize that, quite often it just feels like they're pushing that big boulder up a hill, because they're trying to move something that's not going to move because they aren't thinking about the people.
Yeah. And what you just mentioned is like the $1 million question, which how do you actually get people to change? All those little individuals, how do you do that?
Yeah, and that's been the crux of where I've been pushing my business for the last 2 years. Is it's not enough to teach something to somebody and expect them to do it. It's not enough to come up with some great logic or rationale or an excellent plan and explain it to people. At the end of the day, it's about execution. And so when we talk about execution, you can only execute the things that you feel like you're capable of doing and that you have a skill in doing. And those things are built by those individual habits, right?
Yeah.
Um, Interestingly enough, earlier this morning, I was at a physical therapy. I have a little shoulder issue I've been working with. And every time I come, they take me through some exercises and some strength building and all this kind of stuff. And then they say, okay, you're going to do this at home, right? For the next week. And I say, yep, I'm going to do it. And there are some times where I do it and sometimes where I don't. It's really not that much different in organizations, whether you come in and do a large corporate training event or you roll out strategy and then you say to people, now you're going to do this, right? If they don't feel capable, if they haven't gotten repetition at it, if they haven't really boiled it down to what needs to change for me to do this, it's just going to get discarded and lost. And then they're going to come in for their appointment and hear, hey, things aren't really where we expect them to be. And they're going to be seen just as confused as you are. But in my case, when I work with organizations, we really focus in on what is it individually that needs to change with your people, and how do we support them in that, in building those new habits or behaviors or skills so that we can move this forward. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on a couple, I was laughing with great empathy when you were describing your physio, because I just started working with an osteopath this week. And of course, same thing. She said, by the way, so this is what you need to do over the next 3 weeks before you come back and see me. And I'm like, yes, because I'm all about behavior change. I haven't really been batting 1,000 yet. But we use that analogy all the time in the workplace, right? Where people can invest. And by people, I mean decision makers, leaders, well-intentioned, highly motivated, caring, compassionate, strategic, business results-oriented leaders to invest tons of time, money, and other resources and productivity, taking people out of work, and then say, okay, we did that thing. Okay, go do that thing. And then people say, well, you expect me to do something? Like, I have to change the way I do things around here. I was just talking with a client the other day and they were saying, we recognize that we launched this thing last year, but it didn't really stick. And so people aren't really behaving that way. And I said, cool. So what was the execution plan? What was the integration plan? How did you sustain what you talked about during that 2-day, like we're launching this new thing? And how did you get it down to the level of, back to one of the top three, simplicity, clarity, understandings, implications, cross-pollination of, well, if this guy's doing this differently, how does that impact her doing that differently and that person doing? She said, yeah, I don't think we did that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think part of that is
starting
that
to have that
mentality.
conversation, right?
Absolutely. And I think part of it, especially in a corporate environment, and I'm not picking on corporations, but I think when we talk about business, we have a great mentality around projects as far as we like to cross things off when we start them, right? We cross it off the list like, hey, we said we were going to do X and now we've started doing that. We don't do a very good job of actually finishing things.
Yeah.
Or if we finish them short, which is, hey, we rolled out the training or we rolled out the strategy. We had this big event and people came and got all excited and then we cross it off then. But really the finish line is at the end of the year when those KPIs come out and say, did we hit our goal? Did what we expected to change? And I think that's the part, until we can change that mentality about those changes, those projects, it's about the follow through, right? It's about the practice. It's about the fact that over the next 30, 60, 90 days, whatever, we're going to practice plenty of times. And probably more often than not, we're going to not do it well before we do it well. And it's through that learning process, through those mistakes, that we can actually get better. But I think an organization has to be open to the fact that just like any kind of change, weight loss, physical therapy, any of these things, we're going to do it poorly for a while until we realize how to do it well and actually start to see some results. And if we don't have support during that, and if we don't have an organization that wants to help us finish, I think it's just like anything else, we're going to give up on it, right? We're going to go back to the old way of doing things. That's just human nature.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you have these conversations with your clients, Joel, and my understanding is your primary focus is on leadership. So when you have those conversations, where are, or in your experience and reflecting on it, where are the barriers to people going, yes, I get it, and we want to do that. We actually want to integrate and execute and fall down and learn from it and recognize that this is practice and do it over and over and over again. What do those conversations sound like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of different reactions to that. I think in general, people are like, yes, that's what I want. But first off, that whole piece around actually measuring the activity that happens after and trying to determine, are we seeing the new behaviors? Are people trying to build new habits that support the metrics that we're looking for? For a lot of people, that's kind of foreign, because we're really great at lagging indicators like, completed sessions or sales or all these types of things, but we're not very good at leading indicators. We're not very good at saying, hey, if I want to push this new sales goal, to do that, now let's back our way up. What new behaviors do I have to see in my sales team? And of those new behaviors, what are the habits that we need to build in our people so that those behaviors become part of their daily, weekly, monthly routine?
Yeah.
We don't think downstream like that. So for a lot of folks, they get excited about it. But then they say things like, well, then you're just going to come in and do training and teach us that, right? And that may be part of the plan, but my response quite often is, I don't think you really just want me to come in and do training. What I really think you want is for people to take what they learn and actually put it into practice. So let's focus there.
Right.
The other piece I would say from a leadership perspective is, much like the human brain, we're really good at instant gratification. We're not very good at delayed gratification. So I think for a lot of business leaders, it's we're going to pay to bring in a consultant, either to teach us something or to coach us on something. And we look for quick hitters, right? We look for low hanging fruit. So it's they came in, they gave us these 3 or 4 great ideas. We all took that, and now we're going to go back out to the business and do our thing.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is there's not a lot of change that can happen overnight. There just isn't. But there's a lot of change that can happen over a lot of overnights and how many times that we practice them. So helping them understand that this is not a short process, that this is a long process, and this is something you have to sign up for a while. Not just because I'm selling you something, but because that's the only way this is going to change for the good, right? We want it to change for good, not just for a few weeks and then go back to the old behavior.
Yeah.
I think of the business leaders I work with that struggle with it, it's typically one of those two things.
Yeah. What I've always really admired about your context setting, when we talk about, if I know you do a lot of keynote at conferences and you talk about behavior change organizationally and the execution of concepts and ideas is quite clearly and honestly stating all that you just articulated right up front, which is, hey, you know what? You're all human. People don't like it. And so I'm going to say all these really cool things. You're going to be really pumped up. You got a t-shirt, you're going to, you got a little sticky note you're going to put on your office. And probably, by Tuesday, some of this excitement might have worn off. So let's talk about post Tuesday. Like, I like the fact that you constantly, let's talk about it up front and talk about some of the barriers and the struggles and the fall downs that are going to happen. And to your point, leading indicators around, so what are we going to do when that happens?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to we're here because we have to check off that we did training or we did development on this day as part of a meeting because it's on my PDP to bring this to my staff, to bring this to my organization. But then we just go right back to Tuesday and go, that was really cool. And then go, that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, part of it for me, and the little sign, I guess it's this way, that I put up on my wall is as much a reminder for me as the folks that I meet with. But I think whether it's a keynote presentation, whether it's training, whether it's individual coaching, The exciting, sexy part of that is me coming in and, or at least from their perspective, me coming in and pumping them up to do something that they really need to do, right? And so it's for them, it's about, I just need to get motivated to do this.
Yeah.
And the problem is motivation doesn't last. Motivation is like willpower. It only lasts for so long, and then we go back to the old way of doing things. The key in it, though, is understanding that the actual progress is going to come from hard work, right? And hard work is building those habits. So again, we can go organizational level, we can go personal level. If I want to lose weight, for hundreds of years, people have been trying to find the magic bullet, right? The pill I can take, or the 5-minute crunches, or whatever else are going to change my life forever. And guess what? We're still searching, and it's because it's going to take hard work, right? You've got to build new habits to get new results. And for a lot of us, unfortunately, we kind of expect that we come out of the womb a fully developed human being, meaning like we're adults we're as smart as we're ever going to be. We're going to be as successful as we're ever going to be. And we don't realize the fact that there's quite a bit of things that we've learned that aren't right. And part of that is our process and our behaviors and our habits. And so I would agree with you. I think too often what we get from people is the come in and motivate us. And when I hear that type of language, I usually throw out a caveat pretty early that if you're looking for somebody to come in and motivate you, go bring in Tony Robbins or bring in somebody else. Nothing against those folks, but that's their field, right? Is motivation. My field is not motivation. My field is results. And so if you're going to get results, we're both signing up for some hard work.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, I love that. And it also, you just touched on sort of point 2 of one of our philosophies here is around that, whole human beings show up at work. And as you say, we come to the table, and we're talking about adult work here. So we come to our workplace and to our work day with all that baggage that we've accumulated over decades, and our biases and attitudes and our own belief systems and habits about how we show up, how we interact with others, how we give and receive feedback, communicate, connect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And when you layer on change, which, as you say, people don't really like change. I heard this somewhere. I might have even said it, I'm not sure, but I love it, which is that humans crave novelty, but they hate change.
Oh,
right? Like they love the sexy, yay, because it's new and it's exciting. People always say, can you bring in a fresh approach? We want to do something really different and innovative, because they like that novelty. But then when you say, cool, so let's now change. Well, I don't want to really, even though I know it's good for me. And even though I can see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, I don't necessarily want to have to do the heavy lifting like you suggest.
Yeah, and I think many of us, most of us, me included.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Objects, right? We like shiny objects because they take our eyes off of the hard work we have to do to get what we do, or what we need to get done. And so there is kind of the flavor of the month, for individuals, for organizations, where they say, we need to bring in new ideas. We need to bring a new perspective. And I'm not against new ideas. I think we all have to be learning. And I think if you're not continuously learning, that's a problem. But if I'm continuously learning, but executing and actually doing none of it, right? It's just stuff that's going in my head for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes organizations get more fluffed up by that than actually saying, let's just do one thing really, really well, right? Of all the things that we could learn this year, let's take one of them and let's do it really, really well. Let's practice it. Those are the things that I think when you see organizations that focus on that one thing and really drive it home, all of a sudden the impact they have is huge.
Yeah.
Because there's not 1,000 shiny objects that I have to focus on all the time.
Yeah. Do you have a success story that you can think of where you had a client who came to you maybe for A, and through conversations you ended up doing sort of the full heavy lifting for a while, and whether they actually did realize some behavior change and they noticed that there was a really different approach and therefore we had different outcomes?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would say, well, quite often I would say when I work, especially in coaching, individual coaching, what people come into those sessions with, what they think the problem is quite often not the problem, it's a symptom of the problem.
Hmm.
So I think that stuff happens all the time, but I can think specifically about a gentleman I worked with. We started about a year ago, and he came in and he talked a lot about, hey, I've got this team. Um, they're okay performers. I've got a couple of folks that are kind of a pain for me because they need a lot of help or they challenge me on things, and I just don't feel like we're on the same page. And so his coaching, originally he brought me in to say, help teach me how to manage this team well, right? Or to deal with my problem children. But truthfully, as we dug into it more, what we realized was most of the problems that he was seeing on his team were really about his leadership style. Part
Interesting.
of it was he was somebody who loved firefighting. I mean, he craved firefighting. Now, if you told him that, if you said, "Oh, you like to firefight," he's like, "No, no, no, no. I'm a problem solver," right?
Yeah.
Which is just another way of saying, if you can give me a problem that I can go try to solve, I will pick that over the work I really need to be doing right now. But because of that, and the fact that he wasn't a great planner, so he didn't really he didn't come in the daytime and say, here are the 3 things I'm going to get accomplished today, because he felt like that chained him down from not being able to take on these fires that were going to come up during the day that he needed to solve. So as we worked with him on, if we can get you to consistently plan and prioritize what you should be working on and delegate the things that you shouldn't, first of all. And second of all, if we can, what he was really reinforcing with his team was that you guys shouldn't problem solve because I'm the one that has all the answers. And so it was interesting because he would say people aren't taking ownership, they're not being accountable, whatever else. But when you asked him, well, how does this work? He'd say, well, they bring me a problem and then I fix it and I send them back. And my point was, well, why would they ever choose to be accountable or responsible for the problem when you're going to take it from them and then give it
Yeah.
back to them finished? They don't
Yeah.
have to think, they don't have to execute. So for him, there was kind of a pivot point where he realized, whoa, if I start coaching differently, if I start leading differently, if I start prioritizing my day, so that when somebody does come to me and say, I've got this problem, I need you to help me, if I can coach them, if I can ask good questions and then put them back on the case to work through it themselves, that accountability, that responsibility is going to be squarely on their shoulders, and I'm there to support them if needed. It's a very different leadership style than where I'm at today.
Yeah.
But originally he came in thinking my team is the problem.
Yeah.
And
That's often the
what he
case,
realized
right?
was he was the problem.
Yeah. Interesting. And how did you referred to a number of times, like, if we can get you to do this, or we could get you to do that, or we could get you to do this, things would be different. So how did you get him to do that? What did he actually have to do leaving your coaching session?
Yeah. So I think the hardest thing, I'll go back to when you start talking about hard work and we expect everything to go perfectly, we're often disappointed. So in this case, for the first 30 days, we talked about what he needed to be doing. And he did like I do with physical therapy, right? I say, yep, I'm doing those exercises at home. And then I come back to physical therapy and they say, well, you really didn't make as much progress this week as we thought you would. And so after the first 30 days, we really had to revisit, like, hey, it's one thing to say, that you need to do this. It's another thing to actually do it. And we don't expect you to be perfect at it. So if we say, prioritize your day 5 days a week and you do it 3 days a week, that's still better than 0 times a week. So let's start there.
Yeah.
When somebody walks into your office and asks you to solve a problem for them, and then you want to jump right in with a solution, but you catch yourself and say, you know what, instead of doing that, what do you think? What do you think we should do? Or what would you do next, right? Catching yourself in the mistake, and being human, right? Of just saying, what, it's not my problem to solve. I want you to be able to take this on, and showing some vulnerability there. That's good. So for the first 30 days, truthfully, not a lot happened because he was expecting to do it perfect.
Yeah.
It took that second 30 days, 60 to 90 days, for us to start to get some traction where he could see some little successes in that change curve, to be able to say, I can see how this can work. I still have questions. I'm still not sure I'm doing it all correctly. But it's enough for me to keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
So that as we got about 6 months in, he was leading completely differently, right? And he was coming back with stories about, hey, it's interesting. My team now comes to me with a solution to it. They'll come with a problem, but they'll come with a solution, which is something they never did before. And he could directly attribute it to the fact that he was, of the way he was coaching them, and being able to say to them, I have larger priorities right now that I have to be working on. So I need you to start tackling this, and then let's huddle up toward the end of the day and see how it's coming.
Yeah.
So that's huge.
Yeah. There's so much. Thank you for that, because there's so much that in there that I want to ask questions about. And I guess just make a comment to start. The sense of empowerment and self-advocacy and self-sufficiency that happens when a leader actually does that to people, it seems the opposite of what might happen. But people actually feel better about themselves because they do start to remediate issues on their own, right? And you can support them in different ways. But being tied to the apron strings all the time doesn't teach that self-sufficiency, doesn't actually
Right.
teach competency and deepen skills or application of knowledge. So there's a huge benefit to the people who report to leaders who are willing to say, yeah, that's great, and I'd love to support you. But one of the ways I'm going to support you is ask you to start doing some of the creativity, problem solving, heavy lifting around what's possible here, instead of me just taking the easy route, which is, I know, I'll give you the answer and you can go away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Win-win on both sides.
One of the tools that we gave him to think through is, because he said, when people come to me, they're expecting me to have an answer. Right. And I said, well, are they expecting that, or are you expecting that?
Mm-hmm.
Or have you reinforced that, and now that becomes the news? So one of the tools that we kind of helped him with is, when he felt like he was in a situation where he was, quote, letting people down, right, by not giving them the answer, is to really start with, hey, at the end of the day, my role as your manager, my role as your leader is to help you be successful. And the only way I can do that is to develop you. Yeah. Right. And so these issues are going to come up. And yes, I've had some experience with this. I've got some answers, but it doesn't do me any good to hold on to that. And it's better for me to teach you that. And the only way I can teach you is for you to experience it yourself. So when you come at it from I want to see you be successful, and because of that, we're going to work through this together, but I'm going to put most of the work on you. It's no different than when I go to the gym and I have a personal trainer say, hey, I can give you the plan, right? But you got to do the work. Yeah. And if you do the work, you're going to be successful. But if I do the work, you can't be successful.
Yeah.
And so for him, that was empowering to be able to say, okay, well, why am I putting the work back on them? It's not because I don't want to do the work. It's because that's what's going to allow them to learn from their mistakes, learn from their successes, and be able to start tackling things on their own that they weren't able to before.
Yeah. And also it speaks to what we talked about earlier around efficiency and productivity and clarity of role. So if someone is in an organization doing a given job, we don't need two people doing that job, right? So the person doing the job shouldn't also be having the manager do that job, right? Like the actual work that gets done. So in enabling that sufficiency, in enabling that growth and development, you're also actually making the whole organization more efficient, because you don't have multiple people doing the same work, right? Or tossing the work potato around.
Yeah.
That's just a little Iowa joke, or maybe that's Idaho.
Yeah, that's not us really at all. If you want to toss pigs or corn around, we've got plenty. But
we can do that. We could toss no, I'm not going to go there. So anyway, I was going to say a corn-filled pig, but something bad will happen.
That visual there is it's problematic.
Yeah, it's problematic. I did want to ask if, because I know you and I both use a similar technology and a methodology to do those. Like, I'm not with you 24/7, and as much as you'd like me to be there, like kind of like a personal trainer with you all the time to say, right? Did you use that methodology or that habit building tool with this guy? And what was his experience with it? What did he like? What didn't he like?
Yeah, so we didn't use it the first couple of months. We explained the methodology, we explained the practice, and then we started phasing in the technology over time for two reasons. One, he essentially said, I don't like to spend a lot of time on my phone and blah, blah, blah. So, which wasn't true, because between meetings, I saw him on his phone all the time. But just like everybody else, he's trying to protect the amount of time that he has. Yeah. Yeah. But when we got him to the point of realizing that part of the process is being able to check in every day, right? Just being able to say, here's how it went today. Scale of 1 to 10. Did I knock it out of the park? Did I struggle? That's the important part, right? It's important to have that rating, but more important to that was to actually reflect on it. So really what we pushed was, if you're not going to use the technology early on, what I really want you to do is be able to write down a couple of sentences on that reflection, right? So today, I rated myself a 5 out of 10 because I started with this in the morning, but I got distracted and I didn't do anything with it the rest of the day. So I'm giving myself a 5 for trying, but I didn't really complete it well. Well, that's great. But now what did you learn from it? So how are you going to keep yourself from getting distracted again tomorrow with it? Or with the success that you have, maybe doing it first thing in the morning, that's helpful. Let's learn from that. So learn from your mistakes, learn from your successes, and then let's rinse and repeat tomorrow and let's see what happens. So we started that way early. We moved to the technology later, and he realized it was far faster than sitting down and writing in a notebook or a journal or a Post-it note or whatever else. And what he could see then over time was his progress. So it became an opportunity for him to almost get a dashboard on himself. I think we've talked about, it's a little bit like a Fitbit, for your own personal development or for your own habit growth. And for him to be able to see, oh, here's the progress I've made this week, or maybe, I'm noticing every Monday I have bad days. What is that? Is it because that I'm coming into work late, or is it because I've got a staff meeting that I feel like I've got to prepare for? So how do I need to change this over time? But the cool part of that process, and where I always feel like the gold comes for both me and for them, is when we debrief at the end of the 30 days, right? And so it's what did you learn over the whole process? What was hard for you? Where did you feel like you found success, and how did you celebrate? It's a little bit like a post-mortem on your month, so that you can decide, am I where I want to be? And if I'm not, what have I learned so far that I can really capitalize on going forward? And do I need to set this as a goal for the next month, or do I need to take it up a level, or do I need to go out and teach this to somebody else? That's the part of the process and the methodology I love, because it gets back down to, we're not here to teach you something new. We're here to help you do something new and to see an impact from that. And if we can go to that impact, people then will go back to the well and sign up for it again.
Yeah. And one thing that I find really interesting is the notation of, okay, if you don't want to use this thing, will you find a different system that will give you the same kind of, personal reflection and consistent sort of opportunity to rate yourself, and to notice, as you say, what environmental barriers or windows are there, and do I need to shift something around, right? Do I notice that on Mondays, I'm always rating myself a 2 out of 5. So what's happening on Mondays, and are there other things that I need to consider shifting around to reduce the friction of actually changing the behavior to get those results? The other thing that I always find really interesting too, and when people are using that technology or any other sort of personal reminder system, what I find is really cool is when they get irritated by it, right? And myself included, right? You're like, oh, why is this thing on? And then you realize, we go back to humans don't like change. So we're irritated. It's like, man, is this thing going to keep reminding me? And you go, yeah, because it's not just because you went to that session, meeting, talk, TED Talk, read that book, whatever. It's going to be consistent, regular investments of integration and behavior change over time, like the when X happens instead of Y I'm going to do. ZZ. That's a little Canadian American thing for you, the ZZ.
So what's interesting to me, the other part that's been fascinating, and I'm going to do this for myself. So when I run these on myself, I also realize that when I get that nudge, that notification saying, hey, it's time to check in, and I'm like, I don't really want to check in today because I didn't have a good day. What I'm literally telling myself without saying it out loud is, you know what, I don't want to be honest with myself. And so to have to go in and say, I'm a 3 out of 10 today, that first of all, I have to admit my failure. And second of all, I've got to learn from it. And those are two things a lot of times we don't want to do either of, right? We want to ignore our failure, and we don't have to learn anything. We just want to go back to what we're comfortable with. So for me, there are times where I get the notification, I'm like, I got to check in. And then I'll say, well, I don't really want to do that. And that's the first thing that comes to mind is, so you're willing to be less honest with yourself than you are with other people. Yeah. And so that there is a component of this, of that transparency and that vulnerability that we talk about a lot, that helps leaders make huge strides in their own leadership. The process itself encourages people to be honest with yourself, right, and to reflect. And you can do that a number of different ways. You can journal, you can do those. But the nice thing about the technology is the fact that it keeps it all in one place, and you can see those patterns and you can see your progress. Whereas if I keep a journal, which I've done before, I've got to page through page through page through just to find what I was looking for before, and then it's hard to see the patterns in it. So
Yeah.
It's a fantastic process. I love when people really grab hold of it and work hard at it. But the human mind sometimes, and just us humans in general, don't always like the process.
Yeah. So just as we begin to kind of wrap up, I'd like to ask you about the second statement, which was whole humans show up at work, and we can't cleave parts of our humanness in the workplace. When I say that, what specifically comes to mind as one of the biggest opportunities that you see for people in the workplace today?
Yeah. So there's a couple things there. One is, I think, for a number of reasons, and I'm going to say the American way, but it probably is the more North American way, is we always want to focus on our strengths. And I think there's an importance in focusing on your strengths. But we always then want to hide our weaknesses, or hide our areas where we just don't feel as skilled or practiced, right? And so when you talk about the whole person coming to work, I think there is something pretty amazing when you have a team of people that are working together that both understand what people's strengths are, but that people are also vulnerable with what they're not very good at, but are willing to lean into, right? Which is very different than, I know your strengths, but you act like you're really good at all these things, but I don't ever really see you doing them, so I can't fully trust you. There's a trust element that happens when a person can say, I'm just not very good at this, right? And just accepting who you are, right? It doesn't mean that you can't get better at some of those things. That's not the point. But we all have strengths that we can bring to the table. And most often, those are different than other strengths that other people can bring to the table. And if we all mix those things together, we can get work done. But we also have to be honest. And I think that's when I think about team building, about culture building, which we spend a lot of time with. If you have an organization or a team or a group or a leader who's not willing to be honest about their own faults, mistakes, weaknesses, whatever, or the fact that they won't be vulnerable when they make a mistake, that level of trust is diminished, and people put their guard up, and then we kind of operate around each other. We operate much differently than we could. So I love the fact that you incorporate that in. I mean, I think there's a fair amount of that in the emotional intelligence research that we see around brain science, around a number of different things. What happens when we can really just own who we are today, and then determine what we want that to look like tomorrow.
Yeah. And when you say words like trust and honesty and vulnerability and self-acceptance, even adding the word compassion doesn't often get used in business circles, but if you think about it, why wouldn't we be compassionate towards our teammates, peers, up and down the food chain, ourselves? And all of those big meaty words and values, I think, are the bedrock of everything we've been talking about prior to this, right? And it's often the most difficult to change because it's the most personal and the most human, right? But that's quite insightful. And you're right. I mean, it's not like there's not a lot of great research out there and great content for us to leverage. It's not that people haven't heard it, read it, seen it, gone to a course, taught a course. It's about how are you going to take that thing and behavioralize it, operationalize it on a daily basis, and then be able to see that it's actually changed, and be willing to say to people, this is working really well for me. This is not working well for me. This is what I can do. This is where I need help, etc. It's interesting.
Yeah. I just think there's, and again, I'm going to go back to, I think the corporate environment in general doesn't like weakness, right? We want strength. We want people that lead the charge with, on the white pony and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to go back to in my personal life, in my professional life, in my corporate life, all these different things. both the leaders that I've seen lead from their weaknesses or the brokenness in some instances, those are the leaders people trust,
Yeah.
right?
And the
To
ones
be
they
able to say
connect to.
and
Like, you
connect
know,
to,
when you
right?
see somebody doing a talk and they're like, I, was living under a bridge and I had serious problems and I had this, and people don't go, what a drag. They go, wow, this guy's amazing. And now I actually can connect on some
Right.
very human level because I have stuff in my background too, right? Or
Yeah.
skeletons in my closet too.
Yeah, and I think as human beings, the one thing that makes us all the same is that we're not perfect, right?
Yeah.
And so when we have a leader who acts perfect, they seem less like us, right?
Yeah.
And so for somebody to be able to say, hey, I make mistakes, I'm going to own them, I'm going to try to fix them, whatever else, or I'm not good at everything either, or I need to lean on people from time to time. When we see leaders like that, we say, boy, that's somebody who I think is authentic, that I can trust because they're more like me. Even if I don't want to admit some of those things,
Sure. Yeah.
I know they're more like me than the person that says, just follow me and shut up, because I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
And then we look at the guy and go, you don't know what you're doing. I
Yeah.
wish you would admit it, but you know,
Yeah. Interesting. And yeah, it's funny because when you say that, North American, maybe even elsewhere, there's such a buzzword or a buzz culture or buzz around innovation. And yet at the same time, it's often coupled with serious risk aversion.
oh yeah,
Like in the same organization, well, we want to be innovative and creative. And you literally cannot have innovation without risk. You
yeah.
cannot have it. But that's what they want. We want you to be innovative and want you to be trying all these new things. Like, but don't screw up. We don't
Yeah,
accept failure around here.
yeah. Failure's not an option, but please
Yeah.
take as much risk as you can to be innovative within this box.
Yeah. Within this
And
tiny
please fill
little
out
box.
these 7 reports
Yeah,
to make
that's
sure
right.
that we're within compliance.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, I mean, we're not going to, change the world overnight, but hopefully, I mean, I'm optimistic, and I'm sure you are, that over time there will be, even out of necessity. I mean, I see that organizations are being are under more and more pressure to be as lean, efficient, productive as possible. And I do think that there will be a tipping point, so to speak, around recognizing that if you can, in fact, see a whole human and accept, talk about, and leverage all the stuff we've just spoken about, then you can, in fact, get better human behavior driving better business outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those, it's simple but not easy, but it's possible. I see glimpses of organizations starting to do it, and where profits and business success are not antithetical to being really humane
Right.
and compassionate and empathetic and open and vulnerable and transparent with your folks.
Yeah. No, it's exciting stuff. And
Yeah.
like I said, I'm always amazed at the organizations who try it and do a good job of it, how quickly things can change, right? How quickly people will get on board or that they get the results that they want. But it's for those organizations that are considering it, it feels like a big risk. It feels like a big change, and they don't want to fail at it. So quite often they don't ever try.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, oh my goodness, we're out of time.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, I'm sure this won't be the last conversation we have.
No, it won't. But I appreciate your time, and we'll definitely reconnect again. And I will put your contact info in the notes as well. And if there's anything else that you want to follow up with, just flip me something, and we'll make sure that we include it. But I appreciate the conversation as always. It's always inspiring, I find, to talk to folks who are really passionate about the work that they do and about really bringing forward meaningful and relevant change, in the workplace, because the workplace is filled with people.
Yep. Yep.
Cool.
Well,
Thank you,
thank you for the
Joel.
work you're doing as well.
Cheers.